in 5, 7, 19, 27. Hey there, everybody. Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen here, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, where I take a concept, strategy, practice, piece of information from my 22-year history in developing and implementing successful fitness and adapted PE programs for the autism and neurodivergent population, and bring that to you, the viewer, so that you can take it and use it in your school, clinic, home, any environment where fitness can be safely and practically implemented to improve the lives of the autism and neurodivergent individuals that you work with, whether you are already running programs or whether you are starting at a base level information that is workable, usable, and of course based on best practices. So in this edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, I was speaking with one of my recently certified pros, and she asked about group training, and I said, you know what, I've filmed a couple of videos about that. Filmed, nothing's on film anymore, but we still use the verb filmed. Is it still cool? Can I still do that? I learned the term Riz the other day. I don't know. Anyway, I've filmed a couple videos on group training, but because the process is always ongoing, things are being learned, tested, rejected, utilized. Anyway, I thought I'd film a new video on group training, especially since, yes, it's almost August, which means, yes, it's almost September, which means, yes, we're going to the school year, which means, more adapted PE programs, whether it's your first time implementing them or you've been doing it for years and years and years, and you want a different vantage point for running those programs successfully. So a couple things about group programs, and this is where it starts off with an immediate consideration. If you can choose who is in, or select who is in your group program, best case scenario, because this way we can match up that PAC profile, physical, adaptive, and cognitive capabilities as they are related to fitness and exercise within a group. So we might have a group of individuals who work really well together, not just from the physiological standpoint, because really it's the easiest thing within that realm of 3 different areas of ability. It's the easiest thing to either progress or modify an exercise, and that's what we excel at in the Autism Fitness curriculum, hint. But it's easy to be able to modify or change around those exercises towards the physiological abilities or current physiological abilities of each participant. What is more important, if you can choose who's going to be in that group, are some of those prerequisite adaptive skills. How sufficiently motivated is the athlete? Do they get easily distracted? Is there any dysregulated behavior that we have to take into consideration? And when you have a group of 3 or 4 or 5 individuals, there's always going to be some variation. But if we have a really wide variance in adaptive functioning, you could have 2 or 3 individuals who are highly motivated and another 1 or 2 who need a lot more support during that session. So that's something that we want to take into consideration as well. As an aside, not to go on too much of a tangent, but this is one of the reasons that I greatly dislike doing one-of events. So a number of times throughout my career, people I've been asked, "Oh, can you lead a big group event for us, and we're going to get 20 or 30 or 40 individuals with autism or neurodivergent individuals and their families, and we're going to come and we'll do one big fitness event." It never goes according to the ideal of it, which isn't the worst thing on the face of the planet. But when you don't have a good idea of the physical capabilities, the adaptive capabilities, the cognitive capabilities as they relate to neurological and neuromuscular functioning for each individual, and then you get a whole group, there's not a whole lot that can be easily structured. It's not going to be, depending on our definition of success, it's not going to be a very highly successful event just because there's way too much chaos. And knowing your athlete is one of the most important components of running a successful program. Not a big fan of one-ofs for that reason. Anyway, I digress. When you have a class that is going to be dictated or set up because this is your adapted PE class, these are the students who are in the adapted or in the PE class, that's it. So within those two categories, the one where you can choose who's going to be in that group or class situation, or you don't have the opportunity to choose who's going to be in that group or class situation, that's going to be a big factor in determining your programming and your structure. However, the good news is that it's going to largely remain the same. And for those of you who have been wondering, well, what about group programming? What about group training? What about classes? Because I do so much with reference to talking about one-to-one sessions, and this is what you can do with your athlete. The good news is that many, if not all, of the same basic premises, strategies apply to group situations, and there are a couple deviations or differentiations that I'll talk about. So what remains the same? We still want to assess and address using the PAC profile methodology: physical, adaptive, cognitive. Physically, we want to understand what each participant can do with relation to a specific exercise. So if we're looking at a band row, we want to know what each participant's baseline performance is of that exercise and how much support do they need in performing that exercise. Do they need physical guidance? Do they need just a mirror prompt? Can they do it independently the first or second or third time that you demonstrate it for them, and now they can do it on their own and we're good, we can focus on something else, right? So that remains. Physically, the exercises themselves remain the same. A little bit different with programming, I'll get to that. Adaptively, we still want to have a reciprocal relationship with each athlete and approach it from an empathetic nature, meaning that we understand as best we can how the athlete is experiencing the session so that we can provide them with what they need. Some of our fundamental best practices approaches to adaptive functioning: offering choice, having contingencies, giving behavior-specific praise. These are still going to be just as, if not more so, important in a group or a class situation. And we as coaches are going to need to be very cognizant of making sure that the intended athlete is getting the message. So you can imagine, and if you've seen or heard or seen and heard it in the past in different situations, when you're talking to a group of 3 or 4 or 5 and you're saying, great job guys, great job, it is meaningless and virtually worthless to do so. But if you point out to Sam and say, Sam, awesome band pull downs, you're going super slow, great grip, in a group or class situation, behavior specific praise is really important so that each athlete is getting the information that they need. And then from a cognitive perspective, that coaching and cueing, we as the coach need to know where we need to be to provide the athlete with the support that they need to perform the exercise appropriately. It becomes a little bit more of a challenge when you have 3 different athletes or 4 different athletes performing 3 or 4 different exercises at the same time, because then you or I have to figure out, where do we need to orient ourselves? Where do we need to position ourselves? Where do we need to be so that we can provide the necessary support for each athlete with each exercise? Because even one athlete is going to perform different exercises at different levels of capability. It could be the case that you have an athlete who is independent with their band rows and squats and overhead presses and heavy carries and hurdle steps, all that. They've got it independently. Awesome. But that's typically not the case. So we have to figure out where we need to set ourselves up to provide the athlete with the support that they need. And what happens if we have two athletes who need support at the same time? Where do we need to be, literally and figuratively, in that situation so that we can help support the athlete? So that gets us to the setup of the actual session. Again, the exercises don't really change. The setup might. So, for example, in the Autism Fitness Pro certification, you get all of the methodology behind programming. How do we set up exercises together, separately, sets, reps, total volume, that sort of thing. Again, only important if you want to get a training effect, which is the entire purpose of exercise programming to begin with. So if you want the training effect, it follows that you would want programming set up in a way that's conducive to creating that training effect and having that beneficial outcome, so that the exercise generalizes to activities of daily living, helps our athletes get safer, stronger, more stable, etc. So in one-to-one programming, we have a lot more options because we're dealing with one athlete. Even with when we're dealing with two athletes, it's still kind of simple. When we're dealing with three or more athletes, then we, for the most part, are going to rely on two different programming methods. We're either going to use supersets, which we cover extensively in the curriculum, or we're going to be doing circuits. Now, a circuit is going to be 3 or more exercises, and we can set these up at stations. And there are a couple reasons for doing this. In fact, we can look at the entirety of the PAC profile and go down the list. So physically, why are circuit or stations going to be valuable? It means that each athlete has the opportunity to be moving or to be doing an exercise at any given time. So you don't have a bottleneck, and you can have an athlete doing presses, you can have an athlete doing farmer's walk, you can have an athlete doing squats, and they don't necessarily have to wait. You can also, at each station, you can progress or modify that exercise based on what that athlete's current baseline skill is. That's going to be really important, because if one athlete can do a set of 10-pound dumbbell overhead presses for 3 sets of 10 independently, awesome. If another athlete is struggling with 5 pounds, so we need to provide them with either a physically guided prompt from the elbows, or we need a mirror prompt, it's far more conducive to the success of that athlete and the program as a whole if we're able to modify the exercises between two athletes. As soon as you try to have every athlete doing the same thing at the same level of ability at the same time, you are going to have a breakdown, guaranteed, well, maybe literally and figuratively. And so we want to prepare for that by having circuit stations where each athlete can get the most out of each exercise based on their current level of ability. From an adaptive standpoint, this is important also because you might have one athlete who is so motivated to perform each exercise for the entire duration of the session that they'll just go and go and go and go. Awesome. You have another athlete who performs one set and then they need a 1.5 minute, 2 minute self-regulatory break after that. All right, well, we can work it so that it's not a detriment to the group, and it's an asset or a benefit to that athlete. They can take that break for a minute, 1.5 minutes, self-regulate, get back to the point where they are willing to participate again. Meanwhile, the rest of the group is continuing to go. So you have these cogs working within the machine. The machine keeps going, and if we need to switch a cog out, athlete needs a break, then they come back in. We're not lost for anything. So we don't have to cater the program to the most motivated and capable athlete, or the athlete who requires the most support, the athlete who gets anxious or dysregulated easily or very quickly into the session, the athlete who needs additional support. Fine. We want to follow not the golden but the platinum rule in autism fitness programming, which is meet the athlete where they are at right now and provide them with what they need to enhance those physical, adaptive, and cognitive skills within the exercise environment. So we have one athlete who has 5 break cards and hands off a break card, and we say, okay, cool, you take a break right now. And another athlete who is just plowing through this session. So the group programming structure generally is going to be reliant on using those circuit stations or station setup, right? And you can do that for all 3 phases. You can do that for warm up and mobility. You can use it for power, and then you can use it for strength as well. So you can use it for all 3 phases, right? And then finally, looking at programming from the adaptive perspective, we always want to provide behavior-specific praise. It's a great feedback mechanism for each student or each participant in that group session. And then from the exercise selection perspective, by way of having more athletes in that group, you're going to naturally limit the amount of time that each athlete has to participate because you have more participants. So it's typically a good idea to include, this may be counterintuitive, to include fewer exercises overall than more exercises, because in general, we want to keep those total sets between 3 and 5 so that the athlete has enough practice, exposure, training with each exercise, so that we again get to that training effect where the exercise is generalized to activities of daily living, where there is enough of a development in strength and stability and motor planning that this athlete is benefiting by having a new physiological capability. That being the case, you may want to decide on using 4 strength exercises instead of 6 strength exercises, on using 2 warm-up exercises versus using 4 warm-up exercises. It also largely depends on the other factors of time. How many sessions are you running a week? How much time do you have? I've heard of adapted PE classes that run 25 or 30 minutes, which is really, really, really not a lot of time. In that case, the question comes down to what are the most important exercises for each one of those athletes. Hint, they're going to be the same. It's squat, push, pull, carry, and hinge if we can throw that in. But it may be an entire class of just those strength exercises, and don't worry, those strength exercises performed correctly can also improve mobility and cardiovascular functioning, so you're not missing out on those. But the time factor is going to be a big one in determining how robust your program is. So those are some of the most important components or tenets or whatever you want to throw in there regarding group or class training, whether you're running independent fitness programs or whether you are in a school running adapted PE programs. The Autism Fitness Site certification covers this throughout the entire year, so that may be something to look into. But I hope that this has been a thought-provoking process for you in recognizing what works in group and class programs for the autism and neurodivergent population, and what can be enhanced, and what are the factors of a successful program as well. I'd love to know how this has provoked your thoughts or influenced some of the programming that you're going to be doing, either upcoming in the next weeks or headed into the school year. Leave those in the comments below. I'd love to know what you want to know in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, so you can leave that in the comments below as well. Thank you for watching. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Before you go, please definitely subscribe, and I will see you next time on Autism Fitness Tuesday training.